This is Mrs. Chang's lesson on the tragedy of the commons. So normally in class at this point in the year, you'd come into class one day and imagine there's a bowl of water in front of your desk and a bunch of goldfish crackers. And what I would do is tell you in a group that you can fish out the goldfish crackers using chopsticks. And for every fish that you get, you earn $100, imaginary money. And of course, the competitive side of you wants to do well. So as soon as I say go, everyone starts using their chopsticks, and for better or for worse, they're taking out fish. What do you think happens by the end of this experiment? Yeah, well, you guessed it, right? The water bottle, the water's still there, but there are no fish. For many groups, this is true. And as I walk around the room, I say to them, to you, what are you going to do next season when we need to fish again? And a lot of students say, but miss, I didn't know that we had to worry about next season. You didn't say that. That's cheating. And I'm like, but isn't that reality? Don't we need to think about where our resources come from and how much there is before we start taking out? The problem with this game is, even though it's for fun and the students enjoy it, the reality is this happens in real life. It's called the tragedy of the commons. And it's a theory that proves that every time we have a renewable resource that is shared, renewable means that people can maintain that resource to keep lasting as long as it's taken care of in a reasonable way. So what that means is if we take care of it well, it can keep replenishing itself and we can use it over and over. Examples are fish, wood, farming crops, because it will replant itself. It can be replanted. But if we use too much of it, then it will not necessarily be sustainable, and then that renewable resource is no longer around. With the tragedy of the commons, the idea is because we're sharing a common area, right? There's no distinct boundary saying this is yours, this is mine. It's really hard to manage that type of a resource. So imagine you have a field, right? You have one sheep on your field, here he is, and your friend puts two sheep. Well, of course, you're like, wait a minute, my friend is making more money. So then you put more sheep on the field, and your friend sees that and says, whoa, wait a minute, I'm going to put more sheep. I don't want them to get all the money. And then as this goes on in time, what happens is that field, that grass, becomes overused, and eventually it has to be abandoned because it no longer can actually produce enough food for all the animals there. So the solution, well, the best solution is to think about how we can divide up resources. Right? The easiest resources to take care of are the ones that have clear boundaries, right? But not all resources can be easy to control. In this case, yes, we could put fences for the pasture. But what about resources like water or air? How do we put fences in the air? How do we say this is your air pollution, China, not ours, or this is your disease, United States, not ours? Those kind of boundaries become very difficult. So another problem with resources is it's hard to know how to get enough money to monitor what if people are caught abusing the laws. So lack of funding means that if we don't have enough people patrolling the water, for example, how can we catch people who are overfishing, right? It's not just easy to put people out there. How does this relate to Canada? How does it relate to us? Well, unfortunately, the tragedy of the commons has actually happened in Canada, in Canadian history. So we're using today's example about fish. There's 3 places in Canada that fishing is very important. There's the west side of Canada, around British Columbia, and here they fish a lot of salmon. Over here in the Great Lakes, we've talked about fishing. But we have a lot of other problems here, like pollution and algae that we talked about. And then over here in the east part of Canada is the most dominant, important fishing industry. In fact, a lot of Newfoundland used to do fishing, and it was for codfish especially. They still rely on fishing, but something happened that really changed how much they were allowed to take. Let's take a look. So, as you can see from this graph here, even though you can't see the numbers well, we can see that the amount of fish that people took was steadily increasing since the 1800s. And then all of a sudden, around 1950, which is right here, we start to see this drastic increase in the amount of fish being caught. I mean, this is an insane amount of fish. Over here is 300,000, up unto 800,000 fish, okay? This is in a span of just 20 to 30 years. What on earth could happen that would make that many fish be caught so quickly? Well, the answer is technology. Before that, people caught about 400,000 to 600,000 fish, and it actually employed 12,000 fishermen. That's how much the technology was helping. Why was this area of Canada so important for fishery? Well, it's known as the Grand Banks, and what's interesting about this area is if you look at the water depth of the ocean, it only goes up to 200 meters deep, okay? Now, that's not very deep for an ocean coast area. It means that because the water is more shallow, more sunlight can get through the water, and that will increase the amount of food and plankton that fish can find. Think of it this way, it's almost like a free buffet just being right outside that coast. So of course, all the fish are like, yes, I'm going to come here because that's where the most amount of food was found. And the fishermen monopolized and took over that area to take as many fish as they could. Here's another map that shows you an infographic. So this is the amount of food that was available for the fish in 1900. By 2000, that amount of food had decreased a lot, okay? So technology is that reason why that spike went up, and also the reason the spike went down. Let's talk about that. So some of the major innovations in fishing technology included things like sonar. So sonar is like a laser that can find objects in the water. So of course this really changed the game of fishing, because now if you can have sonars that go down very deep into the water, you don't have to guess where the fish are. It's not hide and seek anymore. It's like, oh look, here's a big school of fish. Plop, let's put my nets in the water and take them all out. So it didn't give the fish a lot of chance to survive if everyone can see exactly where they are. As well, the amount then changes of nets happened. So one of the big game changers was a drag net. So a drag net is this looking thing here, right? And you're like, whoa, what's the big deal with that? Well, this one net could hold up to 500 tons of fish. It was the same size as approximately 4 football fields. Yeah, football fields, if any of you watch sports. It could be at like the same weight as 13 jumbo jets, okay? That's how much the bigger nets of commercial fisheries could catch. Now, not all fishermen use these type of nets, but just to give you an idea of why so many fish were taken out at once. If you'd like to see more information about the types of technology, that you can go to this infographic. I like this photo because I think it really shows the idea of amount of fish being put into the boat. Like people were just catching fish to the point where their boats were pretty much overflowing and they were just walking in the amount of fish. Okay? But why didn't the government do anything about it? Why were we just letting people fish? Well, one problem was that Canada was the Canadian fishery minister's person. He didn't really realize how much fish were being taken out. They just kept assuming that there was more fish. Like, oh, it seems that it keeps replenishing itself. And so they extended the quota. And quota is a fancy word for how many of something you're allowed to have by law. So the quota of cod means how many codfish am I legally allowed to catch. Okay? Also, it would be a really big political nightmare to tell people they can't catch fish, right? It's much easier to tell people, sure, continue to do what you're doing. As soon as you say, you know what, we should probably stop catching fish, then all of a sudden those people who need the fish to make money get really mad at you. If they're mad at you, they don't vote for you. So a lot of stakeholders were in play here in terms of who was deciding the rules. Another problem was foreign nations were coming into our waters and stealing fish. And this still is a problem today because we have such a large amount of land and ocean coastal area. If you remember Canada's map, it's really hard to border and patrol all of that area. There's no way we can keep people posted all the time watching the ocean. So a lot of the time people can come in, take the fish, and the Coast Guard doesn't even know it happened. In 1992, the government announced that the cod moratorium was happening. A moratorium is a law that bans that activity, cannot be done anymore. And in this case, it meant that no one could take any more cod fish out of Canadian water. It was hoped that it was only going to last 2 years and then everything would go somewhat back to normal. But it didn't. Okay, I don't think we understand, as someone who lives here in Toronto with our urban and environment, the extent and the problem, that the reality, the seriousness that people felt when they were told they can't fish anymore. It was like someone telling you, well, in a way, kind of like COVID to a certain degree, you can't do your job anymore. I'm sorry, you need to stop. That's how they felt at this time. They're told, hey, you can't fish anymore? Sorry, if you just bought a big boat for millions of dollars, sorry. So, of course, people were really upset. In fact, if you want to see how angry they were, just watch the first minute of this clip. I was shocked of real life footage of people like going to almost murder this guy who told them that they can't fish anymore. It's a really interesting clip. But moving on, people were really angry. They weren't only angry with that, they were also angry at any excuse why the cod was gone. People didn't want to take responsibility for the fact that maybe they overfished the fish. So they were looking for excuses like, oh, the seals ate the fish. And it was really common after 1992 to find seal bodies like totally like murdered. People were putting pitchforks into the seals. You found the blood everywhere. And because people's anger were real and they wanted someone to blame. Now, an interesting thing I found out is in 2012, which is many years after this 1992 moratorium, they actually found that gray seals are indeed eating a lot of the codfish, right? So it's not totally wrong, the fishermen being mad at the seals. They were eating the codfish. However, the idea that we should just kill the seals, which is something that people are saying to the government of Canada to do, is problematic because what we need is a balance. Maybe seals are part of the problem, but definitely our overuse of technology to take too many fish at the same time was a bigger problem. So one of the problems with managing a resource is trying to find ways to make everybody happy because there's different people's perspectives when you're looking at a resource, who's using it and who wants to abuse it. An important thing to know is that today, the cod moratorium has not been lifted entirely, okay? In fact, it has not fully recovered since 1992, and it's now 2020. Okay, we're talking 30 years later, guys, and those fish have not fully recovered. So what do we take away from this? We need to understand that natural resources are really important. We need to make sure that we're taking care of them in a way, especially if they're a shared resource. We need to find ways to create rules and guidelines that can fit everyone's needs. What you're going to do for today's task is you're going to write a summary about the lesson because that was something that a lot of students said they'd like to practice doing. I'm going to give you a little lesson on how to write a summary in a different video if you need help, but the main idea is you could follow the graphic organizer that's provided for you, and you're going to look for what's the main message of today's lesson, what are at least 3 specific examples or details that support that idea. I don't want you to write everything I said. You're looking for 3 things that prove the idea. And lastly, are there any new vocabulary words from today's lesson that you might want to include in your summary? Okay, you will be handing in your summary this week, so you guys can get started on it, and if you need help, you can check out my other video. Thanks!